Hey everyone, this is Steve Fenlon, Director of Customer Success here at Easy Projects. Welcome to our live webinar. Today's topic is the 5 most critical KPIs for executive dashboards. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. So currently we've got all participants on mute. If you do have a question, please go ahead and type it in the sidebar. And I've got some members of my team who will be answering the questions through the chat as we go. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so why are KPIs important? So we're going to be pretty reductive here and make sure that we're explicit. First of all, project KPIs are key performance indicators. Why should we care about them? So over the years, my team here at Easy Projects has helped implement our PM platform literally at hundreds of organizations ranging from small businesses to Fortune 50 companies. Regardless of the company size, however, our process always starts with a simple question. Why do you need project management software? So what's the root of the need, of the requirement? Most of the time we get some good reasonable answers. So things like we want to be more effective, more efficient. We want to have visibility into our timelines and progress. So things like that. So as I said, good answers, but a little bit vague and not based in numbers or empirical things. So the question is it good enough to know 6 months from now, are those measurements good enough to know if you made the right decision? How will you measure if you're being more effective or not? So what are the metrics that you're looking to improve? And that's where we usually have some awkward silence. Relatively few companies know up front what metrics or KPIs they need to measure. And it's not their fault, really. I mean, everyone's busy running their business. There's no time to stop and research best practices and navel gaze on that topic and be able to choose the best KPIs. And so, the topic of today's webinar is to help in that process and kind of kickstart the consideration of the things that maybe you want to track. And tracking the right KPIs is pretty important. Choosing the wrong ones can cost you dearly. I think to the common question of what happens when you try and measure the performance of a development team based on the number of lines of code that they write, and you end up with code so big that no one will ever be able to support it or extend it or maintain it. So by having this conversation a few, dozens of times, we decided that we wanted to formalize our process and do something about it. So we did. We reviewed, hundreds of successful implementations. And so we've built a library of 50 or 60 important KPIs that span across various industries and departments and are useful generally in project management. So now every time we have a customer that comes on board, we go through this library with them and we choose the metrics most suitable for their business. Once the KPIs are chosen, we set up Easy Projects to track them. And so our clients can then see in real time how they're progressing towards their goals, as opposed to having these kind of wishy-washy, sentimental initial ways of measuring progress. So we call it measurable success internally. It's the name for that process. And it's the topic for today's webinar. So we've picked 5 of the most universal KPIs that we think would benefit any project team to talk about today. So let's get into it. So first one is schedule performance. So said simply, I think schedule performance are my projects finishing on time? Are they trending towards finishing on time? And then as you dig into it, the reasons behind why those are. Firstly, why do we care about our projects being completed on time? Well, again, it might seem obvious, but if it was obvious, why are so many of our customers not really tracking this, not really looking at it on a periodic basis? So if your projects are habitually late, chances are your customers won't be your customers for very long. Furthermore, from a resourcing perspective, there's a cascading effect of late projects on other projects that are slated to start. And we tend to see customers having to invest more in more labor and more resources as a direct result of that. So again, if you're not tracking this type of thing, how could you ever hope to improve it or understand the side effects that it might be having? So now that we've kind of established why, or that we should track schedule performance, let's take a look at how we can do it in Easy Projects. So it'll be a bit of a live demo or a bit of a live webinar. So we'll jump over to Easy Projects. And what I've done here is I've set up a simple example project to look at what we call schedule performance or schedule performance index. That KPI is built right into Easy Projects to help you track and manage your schedule. So let's get started in looking at a task that I've already created. So we've got a cleverly named task here named SPI example. So in order to produce a KPI or produce a metric, there has to be some inputs. The inputs in this case are pretty straightforward. So I've got a start date, an end date, and also progress. So how much progress have I made on this task? That's it really to measure your schedule performance, to understand those are the inputs in order to be able to produce an output. So with my inputs, so I've got a task that lasts about 5 days. I'm about 18% done. And you can see that my SPI here is 1.08. So what does that mean? So with our schedule performance index, we've modeled it to be very familiar and kind of almost like an industry standard from the PMI. But basically 0 is the lowest score possible and higher is better is an easy way of describing it. By default, a score of 1 means that you are exactly on schedule. So you will finish on exactly the date that you predicted or that you planned. So you can see I'm very slightly ahead of schedule here at 1.08. A lower score would indicate that you are behind schedule. So for instance, if I'd only completed, let's say something like 7%, you can see that my schedule performance index dips and it shows, hey, you're below 1, you're significantly below 1, and you're probably going to be late in completing this task. And similarly, if I'm more efficient than I thought I would be, and I've already got 30% of this task done, you can see that my SPI shows that I'm trending towards being well ahead of schedule with a number quite well over 1. So super intuitive, super easy to use. The amount of inputs that you have to put in is pretty straightforward. So it's a bit of a predictive measure as well. So you can tell in the future how things are going to go. The cool thing is that all of your SPIs for project and EP will roll up to the project. And so in this simple example, it's pretty straightforward, but you can imagine if you had hundreds or thousands of tasks in a given project, having all that stuff roll up and giving you a top line SPI at the project level would be super useful. And so in this case, I can see that my project is ahead of schedule with an SPI of 1.38. So given that the SPI for the tasks is above 1, it breaks down as you would expect. Great. So now we can look at how we can use that information to guide our decision making for what I would call some more powerful reports. So in this case, I'm going to use a pre-built reports in our Power BI. So Power BI is a tool that we use that we've leveraged for business intelligence, and we've built it right into Easy Projects. So as I mentioned before, we've got a library of, I think we're closing in on 60 canned reports that are available with Easy Projects, and they can be customized to your exact specifications. So let's take a look at that. All right, so what we're looking at here is so it's a report that is meant to provide a high-level example of your schedule performance. So we're looking at schedule performance, labor performance, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and the overall project components so the overall project performance based on the schedule and labor performance. In this example, we'll be focusing on schedule performance. On the left hand of the dashboard, you can see that we've got, so basically this side of the dashboard is meant to represent completed projects. So projects that are done in the past, and we can use this data to analyze how things were done in the past. The graph on the x-axis, you can see it's over time. So when were these projects finished? And so we've got two measures here actually. we've got what is the percentage of those projects that finished on time. And so in this case, you can see it varies over time. So as recently as October 2019, you can see that 67% of my projects finished on time. And then in the bar graph, we've also got an absolute measure of the number of projects. So I always like to combine a percentage with the absolute number of projects. And so you can see that the number of projects is here on the left side. And we'll say for September, 5 of them completed on time and 3 of them were late. So from a historical perspective, super useful to be able to look at a trend over time and be able to dive into where your poor performing projects might be. So that's why I love Power BI is it's not just for visual purposes only, but you can actually dive into a given segment. So in this case, we can dive into, click on here, and literally the rest of the report will filter down. And then in the table down here, I can dig into what the specific projects were and identify, what were the poor performing projects, and see if there's any trends there, any sort of any lessons to be learned. So super powerful. On the right-hand side, so let me just click out of that. So on the right-hand side, I think is actually kind of a bit more cool. So we've got our open projects. So we're looking forward for projects that are scheduled to end in the near future. So we've got a 6-month horizon. And basically, we're looking at these and we're saying, okay, of the projects that are scheduled to finish in the next 6 months, what sort of scheduled performance are we looking at? And I think, at a really high level, the idea here is, okay, well, is there anything that I can do to interject or to correct those projects in the interim? So same sort of idea, you can click in, and these reports are completely customizable. So if you wanted to see specifics that aren't being shown on this report, then we can do that. And again, you can see that I've clicked in and my projects are filtered down, and I can see exactly why those projects are trending late. So you can identify negative trends, correct them, and learn or identify the trends that were happening in the past, and now you've identified the steps that you needed to correct them. So super powerful stuff. All right, so that's schedule performance. So the next part that I want to talk about is budget performance, or said differently, labor performance. So again, I won't belabor the importance of projects being completed on budget because to varying degrees it dictates whether a PMO or even an organization is going to be profitable in the short and long term. If you're consistently running your projects over budget, you're operating at a loss, and that's not a good position to be in. So same sort of approach here. We'll flip quickly over to easy projects, and here you can see I've got my CPI example, cleverly named as well. So let's review the component parts. So again, you're going to want to track your start date, your end date, the amount of progress that you've made on that task, and then additionally, to give you some cost performance or some labor intelligence, we've got the number of hours that I estimated as well as the number of hours that I've completed. And so on the right-hand side here, you can see that my cost performance index is 1, and basically it's telling me of the amount of labor effort that I estimated for this task, how am I doing compared to that? And so I've set up the example to be pretty straightforward. Of the 10 estimated hours that I added to this task, I've logged 2, and my progress on the task is 20%. So that lines up to be exactly on track, right? So 2 divided by 10, 20%. So again, you can see that if I was in sort of the same vein as we had with the schedule performance index, see that if I bring my progress down, so for whatever reason I'm making less progress on this, the scope's a bit larger than we thought, could be anything, you'll note that my cost performance index dips, and it shows that I am basically running behind when it comes to the amount of effort that it's going to take me to complete this task. Similarly, if I am super efficient and I'm getting things done more quickly, your CPI is going to jump up, and it's going to give you a high-level summary that, hey, Steve's ahead of task on ahead of budget on this task, that he's probably going to get it done in less hours than we anticipated. And again, all of this information rolls up to the project level. So again, if you imagine that, there was 1,000 tasks on this project, and as the project's in flight and, stuff's getting done, the SPI and the CPI here will be constantly updated to let you know in real time how your cost performance is doing. So super important to be able to understand from a labor perspective how you're trending and how you've done so far. So this is a predictive measure based on all of the information that's in the project. So same sort of concept as well. CPI goes from 0 on up. 1 is kind of the exactly on schedule measure, and then anything above 1 means that you're slightly ahead of schedule. So pretty cool. In terms of the way that we can aggregate data above the project level and give you some intelligence, maybe for your exec team or from a portfolio perspective. Again, we'll flip over to our Power BI report, and the principle is exactly the same. So instead of schedule performance, we're looking at labor performance, and we've got a historical look at how we've done in the past with respect to, we've estimated our project's going to take a certain amount of time, a certain amount of labor effort, and you can see the trend over time. Again, this is for the left-hand side is the completed projects, giving you a historical view. And then on the right-hand side, we've got the open projects, so stuff that's still open. And there is a chance for you to intervene and possibly take some action in order to help those projects get finished within their budgets. And so looking forward, same sort of principle. You can dig into any given segment. You can, set up the reports so that as you dig into the data and as you drill down, maybe you identify that there's a trend with a certain project manager. Maybe you identify there's a certain trend within, a specific portfolio or geography, and this can help you, take action before those projects are, finished with more labor than we anticipated. So again, a bit of a simplistic example, but at a high level, you can see that if you were to track this stuff with very little effort over time, over the first 6 months of, say, using a new PM tool or something, you'll be able to get this type of intelligence into all of your projects, dig into the tasks, the project managers, portfolios, whatever, however you want to kind of frame that stuff. So you can slice and dice to your heart's content. And again, from an easy projects perspective, we have these kind of out of the box, and then as we learn more about the customer's requirements in their business, we would, customize this to meet exactly what they're looking for. So pretty cool stuff. All right, so let's move on to our next KPI. All right, so cost variance. So we're going to be moving out of the slightly esoteric worlds of SPI and CPI and start to talk about dollars and cents for your projects. So we're going to use an example project. Will you actually use the same example project and check how the financial module in Easy Projects allows you to track and monitor the financial health of your projects. There are a number of different metrics that we can use. I'll just flip over here to the financial module for our project. Alrighty, so you can see that there is quite a lot going on here, and I'm not going to dive into each specific metric, but you can see that there's a lot of stuff that we're tracking from a financial perspective. I decided to use cost variance because it is a pretty straightforward measure, and I think it's a pretty important one when you're comparing the amount of cost on a given project, be that through expenses or labor, and the budget and expenses that were set forth for the project at the beginning. And so for this KPI, we'll dive into the specifics of this, this toy example. So in this case, based on my internal cost, my user, how much am I getting paid as a user, my internal rate, and my billing rate, you can see that my budget for this project is $750. So it's a short-term 5-day project with a budget of $750. And you can see that Easy Projects is automatically calculating based on the number of hours that I've entered and my rates and any other additional required information, that the internal cost of the project is $200. And so right now there's a project cost variance of $550. So that means that it looks good. We budgeted a certain amount of our cost, and we can see it in real dollars how we're doing versus that budget at this point in time. Now, keep in mind that the calculation uses internal rates versus our budget, and so we shouldn't confuse this for profit, although we do have measures for profit over here, so you can see that that's covered as well. But from a what we expected the project to cost to what it's actually costing us, you can track that literally with no effort in Easy Projects. Again, it's all calculated automatically. There's no more manual monster spreadsheets to make sure that your projects are tracking and performing financially. And again, it's something that is a very simple KPI, but if you were to aggregate that information at a high level, then over projects, over portfolios, the dollars and cents add up, and you can start to put together ideas about how you're trending so far. What is your cost to complete a given project? All of that good stuff. So we do have some examples in our canned Power BI library that are specifically meant for aggregating that information and being able to similarly, drill down into projects at a project level and understand what's going on at a project level, but also give the exec team that high level view of what's going on from a cost perspective. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next one. All right, average cycle time. So this is one of my favorites. So I'm a big proponent of using agile methodology wherever it is appropriate. It's not appropriate everywhere, but it's all about, for me, it's all about continuous improvement. And it's one thing that we've implemented internally. So for this one, we'll switch over to the agile methodology and look at the average cycle time that's elapsed between when so a piece of work was started and when it was completed. It's a great KPI for software development teams, tech support, and even marketing teams. So it's something that I use internally for my tech support team, and we also use it internally for our development team, software development team. So starting from the basics, what is cycle time? So the cycle time in agile methodologies is just the average time it takes for a piece of work to be complete. It's great for measuring the velocity of similar tasks over time. So if you have a similar type of task or a templated task, you can track that and trend that over time to see if you're improving in that type of templated work. It can also be used in a number of cases. So in terms of workflows, functions, teams, that kind of stuff. So let's pick one and dig in. So again, I'm going to pop out over to my Easy Projects. All right, so what we're looking at here is a Kanban board in Easy Projects. And I'm actually going to, hold on, there we go, that's better. All right, flip back to our Kanban board. All right, great. So what I've done is I've kind of mocked up our development board that we use internally. It's less complex than what we use internally, but it still gets the point across, I think. So we use Kanban and Scrum internally for all sorts of stuff. And though in those cases, this KPI would apply. If I wanted to include something from the Agile methodology for people who use that, in terms of a KPI that's important. I personally use a Kanban board and this KPI to measure my own productivity and stay organized. So I used to use a pad, like a notebook, and track lists and all that other stuff. And I can't imagine going back to that now that I've started using Kanban. So it's pretty cool. So let's talk about how we do this. So like most Kanban boards, we start by adding a task into our backlog. Okay, let's close this guy. Into our backlog. So this is the stuff we want to do in the future. It is to be done. We've decided to do it. So we add it to the backlog. The appropriate people, so our developers, in this case, maybe our CTO, is notified that there's a new task ready for work. A user will come in and say, okay, I'm a developer. I am ready to start doing some work on the Jira integration. So I'm going to move it over to the development lane here and start working on that. These are purposely very high level. Obviously, this stuff would be broken down into WBS tasks as part of an overall project. But for the purposes of the example, I've just gone kind of high level. So let's pretend that the developer's working away and they've managed to finish the task. So they're going to pull it over here and they're going to put it in the done status. And a couple points. So you can see I've got a couple of example statuses here. So awaiting customer feedback. So maybe there's some sort of feedbacks process that we go through to provide feedbacks as we iterate forward through a product. And then maybe there's a QA or an under review status. In this case, we'll just drop this guy right into the done status. And yeah, it's done. So wonderful. So how does that work with the average cycle time? So in this case, I've got another Power BI report that I use for this. So basically that work started on a certain day and time, and then it finished on a certain day and time. And as with most of the agile methodology, it's a pull methodology. So as there's no slack in the system, basically, as the developers are ready to be able to take on more work, they don't have to wait for their PM to assign it to them. They can just go and get more work. So it's all about velocity. It's all about speed. It's all about pulling value through the system. And then we can use a Power BI report to aggregate that information and make it useful. So in this case, we've used an area chart. The x-axis represents the month that the work was done, the end date of the task, and the y-axis represents the duration of the tasks that were completed in that month. So let's say in April 2019, you can see that my average task duration of all the stuff that was completed in April was 12.4 days. And we've also actually got a dotted line here, get that out of the way, to show what the average over this period is. So it's at 19.5. So you can see that in April we had a good month. We were slightly below average. And yeah, that's good. So why is this useful? So we can see at a glance that our average cycle time hasn't been as good in 2019 as it has been in 2018. So, that's useful information. We've got much higher average durations through these months here. And we're also at a glance, you can see though that we're trending in the right direction. So in the recent months, you can see that those averages have come down and that our tasks are our average task cycle is coming down as well. So why don't we drill into a month and see what that means? So let's take a look at March because it's quite high. So the tasks in March. Okay. Let's see if there we go, drill down. Are you drilling down? Huh, interesting. Yes, we are. Wonderful. Okay, so you can see it's 40.8 average. The reason I chose that and the reason I've got this example set up the way that it is I can see that I've got a couple of giant outliers here. And there's two possibilities. One, they just took that amount of time because maybe it was some, large multi-quarter feature. or maybe it's a mistake. So in my experience, the mistake is just as likely as it being a large multi-quarter feature. So it's possible that this task was actually supposed to be finished back in October, but we forgot to close it, and then somebody noticed it and then closed it. And so the average cycle time is crazy long. And so, there's some correction to be done. And as we do that, we can see that, stuff will, the average cycle times for the appropriate months and the average will come down. However, it's useful here in this case for identifying, okay, so if it wasn't a mistake, why did it take us 273 days when our average for that month is 40? So if these tasks are similar in terms of the level of effort that we expect them to take, why is this one such an outlier? And you can see how easy it is to dig down into it and identify. So same sort of thing here. Got some big outliers when, based on the level of effort, we assumed it would take a certain number. Our average is 41, which is being pulled up by these. And why are they so high? Why are they so much higher than the average and higher than what we expected? Final kind of cool use case is, so we can pretend that I'm a developer. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to select myself, and we'll take a look at, how am I doing as a developer? So if I was a CTO or a PM or, somebody who's in charge of managing the team, you can dig into a given resource. So maybe you looked at that project or that task in the previous example and saw 273 days. Who's working on that? Oh, Steve was working on it. And then you can dig down and see if there's any trends or issues at Steve's level. You can see that my average is 9.3. Alternatively, you can compare developers. So let's say two developers are working on the same tasks, and I'm going to pick on a real developer. I'm going to pick on Dennis. And you can see that Dennis's average is 28. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that we're working on the same stuff, and mine was 9.3. If you're managing that project, you would probably want to know what the difference is. Why is that? Why do we have such stark average cycle times? Pretty cool use case. You can imagine adding all sorts of other filters here. So you can, compare projects, you can compare portfolios, different geography. And basically, the idea with this KPI is to consistently track it and consistently improve it over time, and identify, any sort of blockers that exist and deliver more value in a given period of time. So a very key metric for our agile customers. Alrighty, so jump back to our presentation for a sec and see what's up next. All right, resource management. This is a big one. So finally, this will be our fifth and last one. Let's take a look at how you can track resource management and why you should track resource management. So resource planning and management, in my estimation, it's probably one of the most critical components in running a successful PMO, successful organization. It'll dictate your project intake process, project completion velocity, ultimately your revenue. If you can't measure your resource utilization, then you almost certainly have over-allocated resources, also known as burnt out resources. You very likely have under-allocated resources, also known as under-engaged resources. And in both cases, there's definitely some risk there, both to your projects and to your organization. And when it comes to the under-allocated resources, identifying those is critical, because you could be deploying those in other projects, and plugging some gaps and having a more balanced utilization. So a solid understanding of your resource allocation will help you answer questions like, do you have the capacity to take on new projects? What's your current workload for the team like? Are you working on the right projects? So you could use resource management to identify some outliers, some underperforming projects, and identify the characteristics of a project that maybe you shouldn't take in the future. Are you understaffed in key areas that's leading to bottlenecks? So maybe the rest of the team is performing admirably, but the QA team is understaffed or has some sort of bottleneck, and it's killing your productivity at a much larger level, and on and on. So let's take a quick look at how to track this in Easy Projects to help you gain some visibility into your resource management and ultimately how you can optimize it. When we talk about resource management, we're really talking about how your resources are allocated across various projects. So in terms of the inputs, really it's quite simple. You allocate or you assign people to tasks. You designate some sort of estimated effort for that task. So maybe 10 hours for a given task, and then people log their time against that task. And then Easy Projects takes all of that information, rolls it up, and does the rest. So why don't we flip over to an example. So I'll use my demo account again, and I'm just going to flip over to the resource section. Alrighty, so this is the resource loading report natively built out in Easy Projects. You can see that we've got 3 different levels of depth of reporting, for lack of a better term. So we can talk about people, the projects they're assigned to, and all the way down to the activities that they're assigned to if you want that level of depth. You can abstract up to people and just projects, or you can look at just people. For the purposes of our conversation, I'm going to move just to people. And immediately you can see, so we've obviously got a color-coded chart here. So I'll give you a quick explanation of what we're looking at. So for every given user, we can see their total load over time. So right now I'm looking at this month, and I'm looking at a daily time frame. You can look weekly, monthly, and you can also filter down to perhaps a team, a specific user. But for our purposes, I'll just keep it for everybody. And you can see that you can see their load over time. So moving forward, we use a red, amber, green system to basically visually identify where you've got some over allocation, where you have some under allocation, and then where you're appropriately allocated. So at a glance, it's really easy to see where you may have some issues. For example, we can see that this user's over allocated during this month, and so just based on looking at this, we can assume that there's going to be some issues and risks on the projects that they're working on. We've got all sorts of useful filters, as I mentioned before, so time filters, who are we looking at, over what period. You can show projects, include projects that are drafts, so maybe you have some projects that aren't actually projects that you've won or that you started already, but maybe you want to understand the impact that that's going to have on your resources going forward. Super critical information as you project going forward. What sort of projects can we take on, and where are our bottlenecks? So we can even actually take this one step further using one of the reports that we developed for our customers. And so right now we're just looking at the user level. What if you wanted to aggregate that information to a project or a portfolio, slice and dice? So again, we're going to call on Power BI here to kind of augment the native functionality that we have in Easy Projects. All right, so we're going to flip over, go to another report. All right, so this is I would call it a utilization report, and I find it pretty cool. We've got a stack bar chart here in the middle. This is kind of the main feature of the report, and it shows the historical resource loading for all of the Easy Projects users in this account. And so for the purposes of this demo, I've filtered down to a user. And so we'll use this chart or this user to explain what we're looking at. Green signifies the amount of time allocated to a user for project work. So in this case, let's move maybe to October. In this case, this user has logged 137 hours of project time. So that's the time that they logged. So that was their productive time, for lack of a better term. Red is or actually we'll go here. So red is the amount of time that is unallocated. So basically that's the time that they should have been occupied working on projects, but were not. And then we've got the number of hours left in a given month. That is the sum of these two. So in this case, we've got 137 hours were spent working on productive time. We've got some time that was unallocated. And then actually, I think for the purposes of this report, I think that this is meant to be non-project time. So, there's always going to be a portion of an employee's time that might not be allocated to projects, and we wanted to recognize that as such. So I kind of missed that one. And so as you kind of step back and take a look, we've got the historical trend line here showing us the performance of that employee over time. And you can see we've got some really good utilization generally, and then maybe in October there were some issues, right? So we note that 60 hours in the month were unallocated, and if I'm managing 20 or 30 people, I don't have visibility into them every day. I'm not exactly sure how their projects are going, how their tasks are going. This is a really quick and dirty way to figure out what the utilization is for a given employee. You could imagine that we could abstract this up to teams, to portfolios, get a slightly different view on maybe from a project perspective, where as you are looking at those aggregated views, as you dig into the unallocated time and say, okay, well, what's going on here? Why do we have such a large proportion of unproductive time? Dig into it, and then maybe you identify that there's certain users that got pulled off for some other project that you weren't aware of. Maybe maybe they've had some sick time, maybe they were on vacation, all of that stuff. And you can see down here in the table that as we dig down to that level, you can see that we've got that level of detail in terms of their the explanation as to their productive time versus their unproductive time in a glance. So you can imagine, and again, like the level of effort for getting this level of detail from a project management perspective is trivial. Literally, you're assigning people the tasks. You are assigning some sort of level of effort for that task, and then that person is logging the time that they spent on the task, and you get such a powerful report for analyzing your business and your productivity of your employees. So super cool, really good at getting to the root cause of some blocking issues or perhaps some underperforming staff, and something that I think most of our customers can and should use when it comes to resource management. All right, let's jump back out to our slides here. All right, so that's it for today. I know that was quite a lot of information, and I'm really glad that that we had the opportunity to put this information out there and have the webinar so well attended. So quick recap, just because I know it was is a lot of information. So we talked about schedule performance metrics. So are your projects finishing on time? And the information required to do that is the level of effort to get that information into the system is very low, and the benefits are very high. We also talked about cost performance metrics. So basically from a labor perspective, are your projects finishing with the estimated amount of effort? What can you do with that information as you start to aggregate it and understand perhaps where there's some trends, both from a personnel, resource, or perhaps project perspective. We talked about dollars and cents when it comes to cost variance, and as a simple metric, super useful because it tells you in dollars and cents how you're tracking versus your budget. And then as we saw from the project financial module, all of the other KPIs and metrics that if you wanted to expand out into understanding your profit, your billing utilization, all of that kind of stuff. Then we dipped into the agile world for a moment to talk about the average time, your average cycle time for a given task. So we saw, using a Kanban board, how easy it is to enable your team to be a bit more independent, assigning themselves some work, increase the productivity, decrease the overall lag or the overall slack in your project management system, and then taking that and turning it into a super useful report where you can identify trends, identify performance of the people on your team, and generally just track the time it takes you to get a certain type of task done. And then finally, we dove into resource utilization, resource management, a key topic from a project management perspective. It is a pillar in terms of being able to run successful projects. So if you track those big five, I can basically guarantee you that your projects will run more smoothly. There won't be any gotchas. Nothing's going to catch you by surprise, and you'll have fewer difficult meetings with your customers. All of these metrics can be tracked, pretty easily without any sort of voodoo magic that you would typically see in Excel in terms of the aggregation. Try and get information from one Excel sheet to another. That's a hard thing. If you want to save time and effort, I would strongly suggest you look at easy projects because, like I said, we've got a process for this stuff, and we can provide you some best practice and some of the learnings that we've seen over hundreds of implementations, and help you start to track that stuff and really change your project management organization without the type of effort that that most customers would expect. The dashboard of all of these metrics can be set up for you basically immediately, and so we've got them ready to go. They're canned. So if you're interested in a free consultation about what a project dashboard might look like for your organization, and learning more about that was just quite frankly a slice of the capability of each projects, then there will be a registration form at the end of the webinar, or you can drop me an email at success@easyprojects.net, and I'd be happy to engage on that topic and show you what can be done. Thank you to everyone who attended today. Thanks to the team for the support, and really enjoyed this topic, and am really happy to have had the opportunity to present on it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope to talk to you soon.